that is open to the media. Having said that, he did reach out to one of the major news hosts on Fox News, and he recounted that conversation, saying, I just got off the phone with the president. He said 8 p.m. is happening. If we get to that point, there's going to be attack like they have not seen. So he is underscoring that the U.S. president seems to be sticking to the point that regardless of whether a deal is made now or not by 8 p.m. Washington time, the U.S. president is moving forward. We should also point out that Al Jazeera Network has reached out to the White House to get a response to reporting that the communications between the United States and Iran that had been going through intermediaries has now been cut off. The White House saying in a statement that from Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, that the Iranian regime has until 8 p.m. Eastern time to meet the moment and make a deal with the United States. Only the president knows where things stand and what he will do. Again, that from Caroline Leavitt. So the White House still leaving open the possibility for turning things around. In fact, that's also something that the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance suggested well overseas in Hungary. Take a listen.
The military objectives of the United States have been completed. So that means, as the president has said, very shortly this war is going to conclude. And I think the nature of the conclusion is ultimately up to the Iranians.
Let's bring in Ali Hashim, who joins us live from Tehran. J.D. Vance says it's all ultimately up to the Iranians. What should we make of that?
Well, the fact is that right now the line, actually we don't know if the lines are cut or open, because hearing from the Secretary of in the White House that the Iranians have a deadline to respond, or else things will be different. That means that there's no two lines going on. And from the Iranian side, I think it's just the same going on, because the gaps are huge. And to bridge these gaps, the Iranians will have to give really some huge concessions. It doesn't seem that they are ready for that, or they do not want that, and they're not taking into consideration all the threats. Now, a few minutes ago, there were interceptions in the skies of Tehran. Then we heard a couple of explosions. It's been going on for the past hours. Strikes are going on, so nothing till the moment is outside the expected. But everyone is waiting to see what's going to happen after 8 p.m. But with respect to diplomacy, we're not hearing anything in Tehran. Tehran is not reacting, and our sources are not responding.
All right, Ali, thanks for that. Well, we know that Qatar is calling for a diplomatic solution to the conflict as soon as possible. The Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Majid Al-Ansari, says the war is at a critical point. Take a listen.
We have been warning since 2023 that escalation left unchecked will get us into a situation where it cannot be controlled. And we are very close to that point. And this is why we have been urging all parties to find a resolution out of this, to find a way of ending this war before it spirals out of control. Right now, I don't think Qatar can offer any answers to your questions. The only thing we can do is to say that all of us in the region have always had a very clear position around this. The infractions on our sovereignty by Iran cannot be explained or justified in any way. The continuation of this war in this way will only mean more costs for the people of the region, for the international peace and security, for international economy, for international energy markets. And there are no winners in the continuation of this war. There are only losers, and the net of losers is expanding every day as a result of the ramifications of the economic situation.
Zain Basrawi is live in Dubai for us. Zain, beyond this warning that the situation could be spiralling out of control, is there any sense from Qatar or other GCC states that they have any agency to affect the outcome right now?
Well, that's really a difficult question to answer when they've been trying to exert their enormous diplomatic power since the beginning of the war, since before it even started. They have very strong relationships with the West, with the United States. Many of the countries here have communication channels, in some cases, in the case of the UAE, diplomatic channels with Israel. strong economic, market, and diplomatic ties for decades with Iran. And they've brought all of that political collateral to bear since before the war even began, and to really no avail. They found themselves unwilling participants, affectees of this war, stuck between two maximalist and expansionist and stubborn sides, the US and Israel on one and Iran on the other, neither side willing to give an inch. And what we have seen is over and over again, really all the agency they seem to have is to be able to defend themselves, fire their air defenses, condemn attacks on civilian and power infrastructure, condemn Iran's consistent retaliatory strategy to attack what they call US assets, US interests, Israeli interests in the region on sovereign Arab soil. So do they have any agency at this critical stage, hours to go before this deadline, reading all of the rhetoric coming from all sides, the severing of communication channels to affect any sort of change? Well, the Qatari Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesman Majid al-Ansari may be more of an oracle than perhaps he wants to be. What else he said in his press conference was, we are still at the threshold of all of these challenges. That threshold was hours ago, and what we have seen over and over again, every day this conflict has gone on, that the escalation threshold is broken by the US and Israel. They continue to go past it, and Iran continues to meet them at that threshold consistently. So what we are seeing now is perhaps the final hours of yet another escalation threshold that, in US President Donald Trump's own words, will be even worse than we've seen so far. And we have to say the last month or more of war has been consistently escalatory and consistently getting worse and worse in terms of ground realities in Iran, in Israel, and here in the GCC as well. What else we're hearing that gives us an indication of where things are going is that the IRGC has said it will respond outside the region, deprive the US and its allies of oil and gas for many years if the US crosses red lines and attacks civilian facilities. And so far, all sides in this, the US, Israel, and Iran, have said something and then followed through on it. And that has been what the GCC has been forced to continue to observe, condemn, and continue to call for dialogue. But no one seems to be listening at this stage.
Zain Basravi in Dubai, thank you. Smoke's been rising above Tel Aviv after an Iranian missile landed in the north of the city. This was the scene after a projectile fell in the Ramat HaSharon district. Alarms also sounded in Eilat and central Israel. Explosions were heard in the Israeli city of Nahariya after Hezbollah fired rockets from Lebanon. At least 10 projectiles were launched towards the north in the latest barrage. Israeli medics say 2 people were injured in that attack. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has confirmed Israeli warplanes struck bridges and railways in Iran, which he says were used by Iran's Revolutionary Guard.
Yesterday, our pilots destroyed transport planes and dozens of helicopters at an Iranian Air Force base. Today, Israeli pilots attacked the railways and bridges used by the Revolutionary Guards. They use them to transport raw materials for weapons, and the actors who attack us, the United States and the countries of the region, the same actors who also oppress the Iranian people.
Let's bring in Nora. She's following developments in Israel from near Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. So Nora, reports, as I mentioned now, these explosions heard in several locations in Israel. These rockets mostly fired by Hezbollah. At the same time, Benjamin Netanyahu coming out and saying very clearly that his plans, his strategy for Iran doesn't seem to be doing anything more than escalating.
That's right. And in the past 2 hours, we've seen warnings of 3 volleys of Iranian missiles, 1 in the south and 2 to the center area. We're hearing of initial reports of perhaps an impact site in Tah Tikva, which has been repeatedly attacked. Tah Tikva has several military industry factories. One of them was hit earlier in the week. Now, the rhetoric, the political rhetoric, is certainly one of escalation, not just from the Israeli Prime Minister, but even the Defense Minister. The rumblings in Israel, if you will, is that Donald Trump shouldn't take what's on the table, what mediators are offering, because anything short of absolute victory, of total decimation of the current government, of creating the conditions to completely collapse this system of government, would be tantamount to defeat. And the Israeli Prime Minister in particular has really tied his fate to this war. So you do not hear words of the possibility of reaching compromise. You hear the exact opposite. And that's why we saw those reports of Benjamin Netanyahu speaking to Donald Trump, counseling him to reject all those offers. Strategist of the Likud party of Netanyahu even talking about scenarios that are far more violent than just aerial bombardment of the air grid, of the energy and power grid, and other vital infrastructure. That hit list, according to sources, is already in place, coordinated with the U.S. Army and waiting for the green light from Washington.
Noorada in Ramallah, thank you. Now, at the start of the US and Israel's war with Iran, President Donald Trump said one of the objectives was to destroy Iran's missiles and raise its missile industry to the ground. More than a month into the conflict, Iran is still firing ballistic missiles and drones across the Middle East, and its main target, Israel. Kulsoon Sharif explains.
Since the start of the war, Iran has conducted a wave of missile attacks against Israel. While strikes from the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah have targeted the northern region, Iranian attacks have been at the center and southern region, causing casualty and significant damage. Now, we've seen cities like Tel Aviv, Haifa and others repeatedly targeted. Now, populated residential areas have been hit, and some attacks have forced people to take shelter. On the second day of the war, an attack on Beit Shemesh killed at least 9 people. Now, it's the highest death toll from a single strike in Israel so far in the conflict. Now, Iran has been conducting fewer strikes as the war goes on, but it's begun to use what appears to be cluster munitions, which are designed to cause more damage. Now, these are weapons that release dozens of bomblets that scatter over 7 to 10 kilometers, and they can bypass traditional defense systems like Israel's Iron Dome. Iran is also being accused of targeting oil refineries and industrial areas across the region. On Sunday, an attack on a major petrochemical hub, the third in a week, sparked fears of chemical leaks. Now, it's hard for missiles from Iran to actually reach targets in Israel. Now, the distance from one border to another is about 1,200 kilometers. Now, Iran does have missiles that can cover that distance in 10 to 12 minutes. But it's the U.S. Patriot systems that we see across the region that can intercept these incoming missiles. And the ones that do actually make through Israeli airspace actually face this. Israel's multi-layer air defense systems that can take down most of Iranian missiles that come through. But no system is fully effective.
A Bahraini resolution at the UN Security Council to address Iranian attacks on shipping in the Strait of Hormuz has failed after Russia and China both used their veto power. Bahrain's foreign minister told the council that Iran's attacks in the Strait endanger the well-being and livelihoods of millions of people around the world.
The Islamic Republic of Iran's disregard for international resolutions and its insistence on threatening the security of international navigation is neither a sudden emergency nor a spur-of-the-moment occurrence. Rather, it is part of a well-documented pattern of negative conduct. Indeed, the Security Council has previously addressed threats to the security of navigation in the Arabian Gulf, unequivocally condemning them in resolutions.
Well, let's discuss all of this with our guests. Mark Feifley is the founder and president of Off the Record Strategies. He's also a former White House official and Republican strategist. He joins us from Washington, D.C. And here in the studio, we have Sultan Barakat, a professor of public policy at Hamad bin Khalifa University. We also have Dania Thafa. She's the executive director of the Gulf International Forum, a think tank based also in Washington, D.C., but luckily to have you here in Doha. Let's start with you, Mark, if I may. I mean, there's so much at stake here. It's almost impossible to know where to begin. But let me ask you this. Does the White House understand that by hitting crucial Iranian infrastructure, that it will cause financial pain, economic turbulence across the United States' closest Middle Eastern allies, the allies here in the GCC?
So the career people at the National Security Council, the political people, I think they foresee what's going on. But I think that the president has so stretched the rhetoric, so stretched the language that it takes this to just this point of escalation ladder that is very difficult to return from. So I think that from a Washington or a political establishment standpoint, what they've got to do is hope for the best, plan for the worst, which means enormous challenges up ahead, whether it's potential refugee issues of people coming out of Iran and going to Pakistan, to Iraq, to Turkey, to Azerbaijan. None of these countries are ready for that type of an impact. The potential of proxy elements that are being initiated even further, such as Houthi, such as Hezbollah, Iraq, that sort of thing. Then, as you mentioned, the economic shock. Yes, I think an increase in oil prices is also quite possible, which will have a dramatic impact across the global economy. Then you have Iran likely launching a blister of attacks. Many of the missiles that it still remains in the launch pads, sending them to the Gulf countries, the neighbors, and trying to hit their infrastructure as quickly as possible.
What I'm trying to get at, Mark, is whether or not the GCC states should be regarded as kind of an acceptable collateral in all of this. Let me put this to Sultan.
Well, I think to answer your question, they certainly know. And they know that Iran, also by experience over the last few weeks, if it's going to go down, it won't go down on its own. It's going to take the whole region down with her. But the question is whether they really care. And I think they don't. And I think they don't because the United States decision is not in its hands, it's in the hands of Israel and Netanyahu. And you could see today, the president is threatening attacking infrastructure. And Netanyahu, what does he do? He goes and he does it. He attacks infrastructure. So it's not the US president who's really calling the shots at this moment. And it's really sad to see the US with its power being hollowed out in this way.
You think that decision was made without the US knowing it, the Israeli decision to already start hitting bridges and energy plants?
Well, yeah, of course. I think. Well, I hope we think out of wanting to think good of the United States that they've not authorized these attacks. But I think, based on experience, the previous attack on the gas fields, the attacks on hospitals, etc., I would say the United States would want to distance itself as much as possible because their president has been publicly threatening to go for infrastructure, and now you hear Netanyahu. He hit. But Netanyahu has the cunning ability to present it slightly differently. He immediately came out with a statement that we took out the bridges that are used by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Of course, that's nonsense because there are no bridges or railways exclusively used by the guards. But you can see an unhinged president who obviously seems extremely frustrated, who I think in his own way, he seems to have come to a settlement with himself, an agreement that this is morally correct. And you could see this in the build-up to Easter. Right. All this spiel of religious, talk around him, comparing him to Jesus, etc. The man, I think, now is at a stage where he feels he has been chosen to do a job that is difficult. No one else can do it but him. And this is extremely worrying, I think, at this stage, particularly if we consider what Israel could do next, which I hope I'm mistaken, but I think they're almost certain going to go for tactical nuclear weapon to show the world and to come out as a nuclear power. And this is what Netanyahu
There's a very dark Rubicon that could potentially be crossed. Yes. Let's not go there in this conversation right now, but I hear you, Sultan. There was a degree of weariness coming from the foreign ministry spokesperson here in Qatar. He made it very clear that he fears the situation could spiral out of control and couldn't really say much more on the situation at the moment. The Gulf countries, we know, and the reason why I think most of us live and work here is because they are shaping new futures for this region, economically, politically, the list goes on. Does a war tonight, Dania, essentially, does it jeopardize those plans?
Indeed, it does. The fact that Dr. Majid Al-Ansari, the spokesman for the Foreign Ministry of Qatar, said that this could escalate out of control is very concerning because, usually when the ministry sends messages, they're usually very measured and calculated, and therefore it's not a good sign for the Gulf states. I know that they're very careful also not to cause any sort of panic as well. This is very dangerous for the Gulf. As you can see, there are concerns across the region about critical infrastructure such as water desalination, energy facilities, electricity grids. And even Pakistan today came out and made a statement that they're willing to protect Saudi in case of an escalation. And for Pakistan as the mediator or the facilitator of talks to say something